And welcome back, folks. Professor Almeida, jpalmeida.com. In this lecture, I want to talk about some of the basic considerations you need to make when it comes to Microsoft Excel. Now, in just about all of my COS and CIS classes, we touch upon Excel in one form or another. And I want to give you the whys behind what you are doing. Now, this video won't be so much a step-by-step guide. Let's face it, there are a zillion videos out there on the internets, and in most cases, you have reading material and training simulations to go over. So if you want the step-by-step, please go through the readings and your training simulations. But in this video, I want to give you the whys of what you are doing. Part of this is critical thinking. You need to think about why you are messing around in Excel. And I do have Microsoft Excel 2016 here. And if you have never used Microsoft Excel 2016, perhaps you have used Word 2016, you will find that the interface is pretty familiar from one Office program to the next. So if you learn how the ribbon works in Microsoft Word and then you get into PowerPoint and you learn how it works, you'll find that it's pretty familiar once you get into Excel here. So here it is. We have an Excel workbook open with two worksheets. These are some of the terms that you need to become familiar with. A workbook is essentially an Excel file. It's kind of like how a Word document is also a file. So this workbook is called Linda Fox Budget. You have your two worksheets here, which are basically spreadsheets. Here's your quick access toolbar, your ribbon tabs, your ribbon groups, and your collections of commands within each group. And as a matter of fact, like I said, once you've started out in Word and now you're here in Excel, you'll see that the Home tab, clipboard, and font groups are very familiar, right? The arrangement is very similar to what you would see in Word. So let's continue with the basics of a spreadsheet. You see that you have columns. Each column is assigned a letter. You have rows. Each row is assigned a number. These columns and rows intersect to form cells. So for example, this is cell A21 right here. Your cells can consist of text, such as personal budget worksheet, or they can consist of values. Okay, values can be one of three things. They can be numbers. Okay, so focus on the formula bar here. They can be numbers, right? They can be formulas like this one, or they can be functions. Okay, so those are some of the basics of a spreadsheet. Again, I'm not going to get too much into detail here because we are here to talk about the why. Now, the very first consideration you need to make is listening to your client's needs. What do I mean by this? Well, let's take the example of Linda Fox here. Linda Fox has approached us and she wants a personal budget. Okay, a lot of times when you see personal budgets, they are just basically personalized versions of profit and loss reports from businesses. Okay, so she's given us her list of expenses and sources of income, and she wants us to create an easy to read worksheet where she can easily spot whether she is going to be ahead in a month like this or if she is going to be behind in a month. Okay. Now, in addition to this easy to read worksheet, she also wants us to create a 3D pie chart for her showing all of the expenses in a given year. Okay, so with a chart, it's a visual representation of your data. Now, when you look at this worksheet, it might not be so easy to tell where all of the money is going from month to month. Whereas if you look at this chart here, you can see right away that most of the money is going to rent, to food, and to tuition. So that's the importance of charts here. And again, you need to listen to your client. Now, in an ideal world, that client is going to come to you with a list of requirements, but a lot of times you're just going to have to take some scratch paper, or if you're in the digital age, you know, you have your memo app right here, and you're going to jot down all of the requirements. So this is where listing is key. And once you have your list of requirements, you then need to figure out what those requirements are. Okay, so perhaps it's a need statement, a source of data. So in this case, she's given us her expense categories, her income sources, and the numbers. a summary of calculations, which you will have to come up with, and any other special requirements such as a 3D pie chart. Now, how do we go from the list of requirements to our final product like this? Well, in just about 99.9% of cases when you are working with Excel, and this also depends a lot on your textbook, because in some classes with Excel, they kind of move around between these three phases that I'm going to talk about, whereas in other textbooks, they go phase by phase. So what are these phases anyway? The first phase is designing the structure. Okay, this is where a piece of scratch paper comes in handy again, and you are going to sketch out the structure of your spreadsheet. So for example, you're going to have your title and your subtitle. You're going to create two quote-unquote tables. Okay, I'm using that term loosely here. You're going to create two quote-unquote tables, one for income, one for expenses. You're going to have those income sources. You're going to have your list of expenses. And then you're going to have all of the months, and then finally a column and row for totals. Now, why do we do this? Because as you see here in our final product, the total in the column here and the total from the items in the rows, they need to agree with each other. Okay, so once you have your two quote-unquote tables, right, you also need to come up with the net income. Now, this is where, again, critical thinking comes into play. What is net income? Well, you already know what the monthly income is. You know where all of the money is going as far as rent, food, tuition, insurance, gas, and other expenses. The net income is the money that is left over. Okay, so you do need to have that basic understanding. Again, if you have ever worked with profit and loss reports, a personal budget is essentially a personalized profit and loss report. And this is where your calculations are going to come in, and you need to think about your calculations. So once you have built up the structure of your spreadsheet, you can then populate it with the numbers. Okay, so part of that structure, you have your categories here, and Linda Fox gave you the numbers already, so all you need to do is plug in the numbers and then figure out the totals. Okay, and we've done so by using the sum function here. And this is where people tend to get into trouble when it comes to Excel. The hardest part of Excel isn't so much figuring out how to build a spreadsheet. The hardest part is the math and trying to translate that math into something that Excel understands, and vice versa. That's where the critical thinking really needs to come in, and you really have to think about what you are doing here. So let's take, for example, the month of January here. How do we come up with the total for the month of January? Well, we are going to use a sum function, and in a sum function, you have the beginning cell and you have the ending cell in the series. And this is pretty simple because we only have two cells we're dealing with here, B4 and B5. Well, what does B4 and B5 represent? Again, you need to think about what B4 is representing, what does that number mean, and vice versa, right? So looking at B4, this represents the total wages received for the month of January. Okay, this is income. You also have the dividends. Okay, that's B5. And therefore, the total then is basically adding up B4 and B5. Okay, so this is the total amount for the month of January. And once you have this function down, you can then fill the other rows, okay, using what's called the fill handle here. And then you can go all the way across and you will have your total for the year, okay, which is basically the sum from B6 to M6. So again, this is the first cell in the series going all the way across in row 6 here to M. Okay, does this make sense? So again, if you need to, look at some of the other training materials out there. So this takes care of the income quote-unquote table. you're going to do the same thing for expenses, right? So here's the month of January. Here are all the numbers that Linda Fox gave you. So you populate those numbers. And then again, you need to come up with a total for the month. Okay, so again, we use the sum function, B9 to B16. So you're adding up all of these numbers, and this gives you your total expenses. And as before, you can copy this across to give you the total expenses for the year. Now, these numbers here, right, needs to agree, the total needs to agree with the numbers here. Okay, so that's what we're doing, we're cross-checking. Now, net income. What is the net income? Well, to determine the net income, you need to think about what are going to be the two numbers that you subtract. Okay, I see this error a lot with my classes where the numbers tend to get switched. Okay, so you need to think about what you are going to do mathematically to determine the net income. Well, the net income is your total income minus the expenses. Okay, net income is income minus expenses. Now, how do we translate that? Okay, so we have our income right here. This is your total income. This is cell B6. We have total expenses. This is B17. And if we plug in those two cells, your net income would therefore be B6, remember B6 income, minus B17. Remember B17 is expense. Okay, so what you will have here is B6 minus B17. And as you can see here, for the month of January, Linda Fox has $2,241 and some pocket change left over. And then again, once you have this formula figured out, you can then copy it over and then get the total net income for the year. Okay, so that's the second phase. So you've built the structure, you've populated that structure with data, you've done your calculations, and the final step is to make it look all pretty. Okay, remember, it needs to be easy to read. So for instance, we have parentheses denoting negative numbers here. So there are 2 months of the year where Linda is spending more than she takes in. Okay, so the final step is to make it look all pretty and presentable. And of course, you can do some other things to draw attention to these negative cells here through conditional formatting, for example. And again, you can check out other materials on how to do that. So once you have the worksheet completed, then you can build the chart. And with the chart, you need to think about what are you going to show here and which cells are you going to select. Now, with a chart, you need to be able to show what the categories are and then what the amounts are for each categories. So for in this instance, you are going to have two different sets of cells. You're going to have a set here, which is what's called a range, with your list of categories, and then you're also going to have your totals for each category, and this is where you can then build a chart. So I'm going to do a real quick and dirty chart right here. Okay, you can do it this way. This is another way to do a pie chart, or you can just build a 3D pie chart like this. Okay, and then you just go ahead and you make it pretty afterwards. So anyway, those are the three phases. Those are the things you need to think about when it comes to Microsoft Excel. Think about what your client wants. Okay, once you have determined what those requirements are, sketch them out on paper so that you have an idea of what your spreadsheet is going to look like. Build the structure of your spreadsheet, have those categories on hand, then populate it with the data, and then finally make it look pretty. Okay, if it's a good textbook, they will have you walk through those three phases. Again, some other textbooks I have seen in the past, they have a tendency to have you do the formatting in the middle of other things, and you know, I hope that isn't too confusing. So anyway, I hope this video helps to get you thinking about why you are doing what you are doing. If it does help, please do hit that like and subscribe buttons and help me out as well. Anyway, that's all I have for now. Hope this helps. Thanks for watching.